Most people assume the hardest part of building something significant is the building itself. Machiavelli would tell you otherwise. The real danger starts the moment it actually begins working. The instant you gain money, influence, or visible momentum, people start watching you differently. Some admire it, some quietly calculate how to use it, and some simply wait, patiently, for the first mistake that gives them an opening. Years of grinding in obscurity feel hard in the moment, but they're actually the safe part. Nobody questions someone nobody's watching. You can fail privately, adjust, rebuild, and no one keeps score. The instant you start winning visibly, that privacy disappears, and the entire nature of the game changes underneath you. Machiavelli studied this shift more carefully than almost anyone in his era. He watched rulers rise through genuine skill and then unravel, not from weakness and not from any shortage of ambition, but because they'd never prepared for what success itself would demand of them. They assumed the climb was the dangerous part. They were wrong. The climb is simply the entry fee. The real test begins the moment you reach any real height. Because success brings exposure along with it, new eyes, new calculations, people quietly reassessing their entire relationship to you. Some deciding you're now useful and others deciding you're now a threat. He wasn't working this territory alone. Seneca, writing from inside the volatile politics of imperial Rome, warned that prosperity tends to be a far more dangerous teacher than adversity, because adversity keeps the senses sharp while comfort quietly dulls them. Sun Tzu treated overconfidence, following a victory, as one of the most reliable precursors to a later defeat, and Baltasar Gracián built much of his own philosophy around the discipline required to manage exactly this moment, the point where rising fortune starts attracting attention a person isn't yet prepared to handle. 7 brutal truths, drawn from all of them, about what actually happens the moment you start rising, who to watch, what to guard, and how to build something sturdy, enough to survive, even without your hand permanently on it. Stay through the end, because the 7th truth is the one that decides whether anything you build actually lasts. Drop this in the comments before we begin. I'm building to last, not just to win. Let's begin. Truth 2. Success is more dangerous than struggle. Here's something Machiavelli understood earlier than most people ever managed to learn. Success, counterintuitively, is more dangerous than the struggle that preceded it. While struggling, attention stays sharp by necessity. Every move gets checked twice. Every decision gets questioned, because there's no comfortable alternative available. The instant things start genuinely working, that sharpness begins fading, deals close more easily, doors open with less resistance, and without quite noticing it, vigilance starts relaxing in exactly the places where relaxing tends to be the most costly. This is one of history's more reliably repeated patterns. Leaders who fought their way upward through discipline and sharp instinct frequently lost that same position, not through one dramatic failure, but through a slow, almost invisible drift. They stopped double-checking, stopped questioning the people around them, and began assuming their position was secure, simply because it had been secure the day before. Seneca described this exact drift as one of prosperity's quieter dangers, arguing that comfort erodes vigilance far more effectively than any direct attack could, precisely because it doesn't feel like erosion while it's happening. The trouble is that success feels like proof of something permanent. It feels like evidence that a formula has been solved, that easing off is finally earned. But success only demonstrates that a particular approach worked under a particular set of conditions at a particular moment. Conditions shift, competitors adapt. New pressures emerge that simply didn't exist during the climb. And if attention has drifted elsewhere because comfort took hold, those pressures go unnoticed until responding to them becomes far more difficult than it needed to be. This is why the most genuinely dangerous phase, for anyone rising, isn't the struggle itself. It's the plateau immediately following the first real win. That's when the guard comes down. That's when hard questions about one's own decisions quietly stop being asked, because everything currently feels like it's working, and that exact posture is what opens the door to the mistake capable of undoing everything built up to that point. Gracián's writing addressed this danger directly, describing prudence as a discipline that must intensify, not relax, the moment fortune improves, because danger rarely announces itself. It waits quietly for the specific moment someone stops looking for it. Staying sharp after genuine success means maintaining the same standard of scrutiny that existed before anyone was paying attention, treating every win as a checkpoint rather than a finish line. Drop this in the comments. I stay sharp especially after I win. Truth 3. Rising reveals who people actually are. Something strange happens the moment visible success begins. People show you exactly who they are, whether or not they intend to. Machiavelli devoted considerable attention to this exact shift. Not how people behave while you're struggling. That part is simple, because kindness costs nothing towards someone who isn't yet a threat. What he studied was the moment rising begins, because that's when masks genuinely slip, revealing who was actually invested in you, and who had simply been waiting, nearby until you became useful. Watch closely enough, and patterns start emerging. Some people grow quietly distant the moment success becomes visible. Not hostile, simply less present, a little slower to respond, noticeably less enthusiastic about wins than they once were about struggles. That distance carries information about how they genuinely perceive the shift, even if it's never said aloud. Others move in the opposite direction, suddenly warmer, more available, more complimentary than before. Some of that warmth is entirely genuine. Machiavelli's counsel here was to stay alert regardless, because closeness that only appears after a rise isn't necessarily loyalty. It's frequently positioning. People drawn less to who you are and more to what your rise can now offer them. A third group simply observes in silence, offering neither warmth nor distance. And these are often the most important to watch closely, because their reaction reveals the least on the surface and the most underneath it. Machiavelli believed silence during someone else's rise frequently conceals calculation, not always malicious, but calculation nonetheless. They're deciding something, and the conclusion rarely becomes visible until much later. This matters because the people present during a climb aren't automatically entitled to remain present during whatever follows. Comfort tests loyalty far less rigorously than circumstance does. Someone who stood beside you through nothing in particular has proven considerably less than someone who remains genuinely unchanged after you gain something they could exploit. Power, Machiavelli argued, reveals character faster than almost any other condition, because it's simple to treat someone well when they have nothing you want. It's considerably harder once they hold something you could take. Drop this in the comments. I watch who stays the same when I rise. Truth 4. Your inner circle is your early warning system. Once it's clear how rising reshapes the people around you, the next lesson follows naturally. Carelessness about who stands closest to you becomes a genuine liability, not a minor oversight. Machiavelli believed a ruler's actual strength was frequently judged less by individual decisions and more by the quality of the people surrounding him. Because that circle shapes what information actually reaches you, what warnings arrive in time to matter, and what blind spots quietly develop without your awareness. Choose poorly, and the loss isn't merely an unreliable ally, it's a loss of visibility into your own genuine risks. The most common mistake is selecting an inner circle for comfort rather than value, keeping people close because they're familiar and agreeable, rather than because they add genuine strength, honesty, or protection to whatever's being built. Comfort feels good immediately, but it carries a cost that tends to surface precisely when a hard truth was needed and, instead, only agreement was offered. Machiavelli was direct about this specific danger, treating flatterers as one of the most corrosive influences a rising person could tolerate, not because flattery feels unpleasant, but because it feels good. And things that feel good are precisely the things people stop examining critically. A flatterer never warns against a mistake in progress. They smile through it, and the consequences arrive regardless, consequences that honest counsel could often have prevented. This doesn't call for surrounding yourself with reflexive critics either. It calls for people willing to speak an inconvenient truth when it matters, whose investment lies in your long-term position rather than your short-term comfort. That kind of loyalty is genuinely rare, and worth considerably more than a wide circle of people who only ever agree. There's also a meaningful distinction between people who are useful and people who are trustworthy, and a wise person learns to distinguish them quickly. Some bring skill, access, or resources, but their loyalty bends toward whichever direction benefits them most. Others bring less obvious value on paper, yet hold steady regardless of which way circumstances shift. Knowing which category each person genuinely belongs to, and weighting their counsel accordingly, is one of the sharper skills available to anyone rising. Drop this in the comments. I choose my circle for truth, not comfort. Truth 5. Your full capability isn't owned to everyone. Here's a lesson most people resist until circumstance eventually forces the point. Full transparency about what you're actually capable of is not owed to everyone who happens to be watching. The more people understand your genuine capability, your real skill, resources, and limits, the more precisely they can plan around it, counter it, or use it against you. Complete openness might feel honest in the moment, but in any environment shaped by competition and rising influence, it frequently undermines the very person practicing it. Consider the reverse perspective. Someone who fully understands your capabilities knows exactly what to avoid provoking, what's worth imitating, and where your genuine limits sit. Someone who only sees a partial picture is forced to guess, and guessing tends to produce hesitation, which more often than not works in your favor rather than against it. This isn't an argument for dishonesty. It's an argument for pacing disclosure deliberately. Machiavelli observed that rulers who revealed too much too soon frequently lost their advantage. Before they ever genuinely needed it, once your ceiling is fully known, you stop producing surprises, and in any environment governed significantly by perception, surprise remains one of the more valuable assets available to hold in reserve. Gracián made a related point, his own writing returns to repeatedly, that the wise deliberately keep something in reserve, because a fully understood person becomes fully predictable, and a fully predictable person becomes considerably easier to plan against. There's a quieter benefit here too. When people don't fully know your capability, they tend to treat you with a certain caution, an awareness that more might exist beneath the visible surface than they can currently measure. That subtle uncertainty frequently earns more genuine respect than an open display of full ability ever manages to, because certainty breeds comfort, and comfort over time breeds carelessness in how people treat you. Drop this in the comments. My full capability is mine to reveal, not theirs to demand. Truth 6. Success manufactures enemies whether you earn them or not. This might be the hardest truth in Machiavelli's entire framework to genuinely accept. Success itself, simply by existing, creates friction with people who feel threatened, overlooked, or diminished by the comparison it forces. Most people assume enemies form through direct conflict or clear wrongdoing. Machiavelli saw something deeper running underneath that assumption. Rising above a certain visible threshold is frequently enough, on its own, to generate resistance, without any harm ever having been done to anyone directly. This feels unfair precisely because it often is. No one was wronged on the way up, and yet people never directly crossed. Begin responding with quiet resentment or open resistance regardless. Machiavelli's explanation wasn't cynical so much as simply honesty. About human comparison, people measure themselves against others constantly, whether they'd admit it or not. And when someone nearby rises sharply, it forces an uncomfortable comparison that not everyone manages to sit with peacefully. Some respond to that comparison with genuine inspiration, using someone else's rise as fuel for their own. A meaningful number responds with resentment instead, because the success becomes a mirror, reflecting back a gap they haven't yet closed, and resentment, left unaddressed, rarely stays quiet indefinitely. It tends to surface eventually as subtle sabotage, quiet distancing, gossip, or resistance dressed up as something more acceptable. Schopenhauer, writing on envy specifically, described it as one of the more universal and least examined forces in human behavior, an almost automatic response to witnessing someone else's advancement, regardless of whether that advancement came at any personal cost to the observer. Understanding this reframes how opposition should be read. Not every adversary earned that role through direct provocation. Many earned it simply by watching someone else grow while remaining still themselves, and choosing to attribute the resulting gap to the person who moved rather than to their own inaction. Drop this in the comments. I expect resistance. It doesn't slow me down. Truth 7. Build something that doesn't collapse the moment you step away. This is the truth that decides whether anything built across the previous 6 actually lasts. And it's the one most people never get around to addressing until it's already too late to matter. Everything discussed so far, self-mastery, vigilance after success, reading who stays genuine, choosing a circle deliberately, guarding your full capability, expecting manufactured resistance, protects a rise while you're personally present to manage it. None of it on its own protects whatever's been built once you're not standing there holding it together. Machiavelli's writing on lasting states returns repeatedly to a related distinction: structures that depend entirely on one person's continued presence and judgment are fundamentally fragile, regardless of how strong that person currently is, because a single point of failure, illness, absence, a moment of poor judgment, threatens the entire structure at once. What separates something durable from something merely impressive is whether it continues functioning when the person who built it steps back, even temporarily. This means building systems, standards, and successes rather, than simply accumulating personal wins that only exist as long as personal attention remains fixed on them. It means training the people closest to you well enough that their judgment holds up under pressure, without requiring your direct instruction every time. It means documenting the reasoning behind decisions, not just the decisions themselves, so the logic survives even if you're not there to explain it in the moment. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire that would inevitably outlast him, regardless of his own preferences, wrote often about the responsibility of building structures, sturdy enough to function under successors who wouldn't share his exact temperament or judgment, recognizing that anything built to depend entirely on one specific mind was, by definition, temporary, however impressive it looked in the moment. The final measure of anything built isn't how it performs while actively managed. It's how it holds up under absence, under a bad month, under a successor who isn't you. Build for that condition from the beginning, and the other 6 truths become genuine foundation. Rather than simply personal survival skills, drop this in the comments. I build what survives without me. Most people prepare extensively for the climb, and almost not at all for what happens once the climb succeeds. That imbalance is precisely what Machiavelli spent so much of his writing trying to correct, because the danger was never really the difficulty of rising. It was the unpreparedness that so often followed the moment rising actually worked. 7 truths drawn from Machiavelli alongside Seneca, Sun Tzu, Gracián, Marcus Aurelius, and Schopenhauer, about exactly what changes the moment visible success begins, who to watch, what to guard, and what needs to be built sturdy enough to outlast your own direct hand on it. None of this requires becoming paranoid or cold toward the people genuinely worth keeping close. It requires becoming honest about a pattern that repeats reliably enough across history to be worth taking seriously. Success doesn't announce its dangers. It simply waits quietly for whoever stopped watching for them. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. I rise with my eyes open.